It was 1959. Dad was 43 years old and having his own happy version of a midlife crisis. He was going to leave denominational work, and he'd ruled out missions. If he was going to pastor again, there was really only one church he wanted, South Bend Calvary Temple. It was the largest Assembly of God church in the state of Indiana, third largest in the nation, had a bookstore, grade school, bus routes, its own local weekly television show, unheard of at the time. Its talented pastor, Lester Summerall, was a missionary statesman, and he was wanting Dad to take over. But Summerall had a habit of leaving and coming back. He had done it before. Our summer trips to the Dakotas in the late 50s had been so much fun that in the summer of 1959, while Dad was weighing his options, we returned to the Dakotas again. Uncle Bus's family was a perfect match. We all had someone to run with. Jim and Bill were teenagers. Both of them could drive, and the twins were teenagers too. It seemed that being a teenager was about the highest calling of mankind. The rest of us looked on with envy. In 1959, we made the trip to see our very own cousin get married, Donna Dutton, daughter of our Uncle Ray and Aunt Dorothy. She was going to marry Willie Tatum, an evangelist. It was all very exciting. They would travel the country. We knew all about that from Willis Short. My cousin, Ray Wead, and I were ushers and had the awesome responsibility of lighting candles and walking Grandma Wead down the aisle to her seat. And then suddenly, like a late summer storm, Lester Summerall made it official. He had accepted a church in Hong Kong. Dad was invited in to take over. The South Bend Tribune announced the transition. We posed for a family picture in Indianapolis that year, but by October it was used to announce the new first family of Calvary Temple. We moved into the Summerall house on Ireland Road. It was a mansion, the perfect setting for our ritual games of lions and tigers. Jim came home from college for Christmas, and Willa Sturgis, Mama, came in to help Mom unpack. At night, we joined kids from the church tobogganing down the hills of a golf course across the street. Summerall and Dad were bound by a common appreciation for the healing ministry. Years before, denominational leaders had asked Dad to investigate a Baptist preacher named William Branham. They were getting letters from across the country about his crusades, and he was from Indiana, so Dad was asked to take a look. It started a lifelong investigation, if you will, of healing ministries. In 1955, he had been booed off the floor of the General Council of the Assemblies of God for defending them. 2 years later, respecting a man who stood up for his beliefs, the AG turned around and voted Dad onto their national board. He was an executive presbyter, a leader in the denomination. Throughout the 1950s, healing crusades were sparking a phenomenal rise in evangelism across the world. Summerall helped ignite it in the Philippines, but its greatest manifestation was in South America, especially Brazil and Argentina. Huge Pentecostal churches emerged, and the Assemblies of God wanted their share. They looked to Dad to build relationships with the pastors and the celebrity healing evangelists leading the phenomena. He and Mom were often back and forth to Latin America. Sometimes Dad was invited in to address the pre-crusade events for ministers and religious workers. Even these numbered into the thousands. The biggest meetings in Latin America were conducted by a Colorado preacher named Clifton Erickson. They filled the new soccer stadium in Sao Paulo and dwarfed Billy Graham crusades of that day. During these trips, Jim and I stayed in Kansas City or Oklahoma with our grandmother. Bill and Tim stayed with Aunt Florence in Minneapolis. There were some in the South Bend church who were counting on Dad to fail and Summerall to come back. Maybe Wead appreciated the healing ministry, but Summerall wrote books about it. There were whispers among Summerall's people. Dad wasn't charismatic. Don't pay your tithes. He will give up and go away. But Dad kept honoring and edifying Summerall, and soon there were counter rumors. Summerall may be charismatic, but Wead is loving, and the greatest of these? If Roy Wead wasn't flamboyant in the pulpit, he surely knew how to promote. He'd watched Ted Vibbert build a church in Indianapolis from 100 to 1,000 in 3 years. Summerall had kept his church to himself. Dad exposed him to a long list of ministries passing through choirs, evangelists, TV stars, even a Christian magician. And the once isolated congregation responded. Attendance was up, way up. Calvary Temple moved into second place among Assembly of God churches in the nation. He had kept bringing back Tony Fontaine. He had been on the Ed Sullivan Show. Some were now criticizing Dad for being an Ed Sullivan himself, only the host to the real stars. But being underexposed had its advantages. Soon even Dad was drawing a crowd. There was one medium where Roy Wead's dignity and calmness worked to his advantage: television. In 1960, he took it a notch higher, launching one of the first daily religious programs in America. And then in August 1960, he brought in the big Pentecostal enchilada himself, Oral Roberts. He had served as a chairman for a Roberts crusade in Indianapolis in 1956, and so he would do it again in South Bend, with thousands of new converts needing a new church. Right on the heels of the Roberts was the hottest show in Christianity, the Sunshine Party. The church was packed. Services went on daily for 3 weeks. Attendance soared. When we celebrated our first anniversary at Calvary Temple, the church was briefly listed as the largest Assembly of God church in the nation. Dad generously brought back Summerall and lauded him to the heavens, but Summerall let it be known he was tired of Hong Kong, and he was not in a good mood.